So hopefully this is going to be a series. The last time that I was at Lodi Ashram, I had promised that I will be having a series on transformations as per as Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And I'm going to begin with transformation of mind. And the reason primarily is that we human beings are mental beings, and the way our education is structured at this point in time, it requires a lot of development of the mind. And as you may have noticed from the announcement, one of the aphorisms of Sri Aurobindo is ego was the helper, ego is the bar. And I feel that this is a pretty radical statement because most spiritual traditions or practices sort of denounce ego and they do not talk about the development of ego. And here is Sri Aurobindo who is saying that the spiritual progress is facilitated by the development of ego till a certain point in time. Ego was the helper, ego is the bar. It becomes a bar after a certain point in time, but till a certain point in evolution, it certainly is the helper. Quite close to this was a statement made by the Mother as well, where the Mother says that the development of individuality is very important as well in the process of spiritual development, and particularly from the standpoint of integral yoga. Both Mother and Sri Aurobindo have emphasized this many times, that this yoga is world transformation yoga. We have to actively participate in the processes of the world. And because we have to participate in the processes of the world, it is very important that we develop our mind, we develop our individuality, we also develop our ego. But after a certain point in time, we have to dissolve our individuality, our ego, and our mind. And if you're familiar with Vedantic thought, then you would know that individuality, ego, mind, they are part of the same conglomerate. In Vedantic literature, it is called Antakaran, and Sri Aurobindo also has spoken about this in one of the chapters in Life Divine. Ahankara, or the ego, is part of the mind. So, the transcendence of mind is facilitated by the transcendence of ego, and conversely, transcendence of mind facilitates the transcendence of ego. And therefore, it becomes extremely important for us to understand and know what this mind is all about. It is also commonly understood in integral yoga that mind is one of the intermediary planes of existence. There are planes of existence that are below the mind, and I'm putting below in quotes, and there are planes of existence that are above the mind. I'm once again putting above in quotes. And the reason why I'm saying this is because the moment we begin to talk about higher and lower, we begin to construct a very hierarchical scheme of things in a three-dimensional manner. And the Mother herself has emphasized that there are many dimensions to existence. And these dimensions are certainly more than three. And also, the moment we begin to talk about higher and lower, what we inadvertently start doing is that we start operating in dichotomies and dualities. And once again, the transcendence of dichotomies and dualities are extremely important from the spiritual standpoint. But given we have to use the language which is available to us, we will continue to use the terms lower and higher. But I would want us to have this understanding that we are going to use them very, very loosely. Now, because mind is one of the intermediary planes of existence, and that there are planes of existence which are beyond the mind, and given that we as human beings have the propensity to get attached to mind or begin to get identified with mind, that it becomes extremely important for us to go beyond the mind. And Sri Aurobindo says that in order to go beyond the mind, it is extremely important that we make the mind silent or still the mind. And there are many different ways of silencing the mind or stilling the mind. Meditation is certainly one of the ways. There are many different types of meditations also. But one of the ways which is commonly used is that one sits in a quiet pose and begins to observe his or her mind. One begins to observe the fluctuations of thoughts that one is undergoing. After a certain point in time, what happens is that one begins to develop that witness consciousness that Vedanta speaks about quite profusely. And as the witness consciousness within us grows, we are not only able to go beyond our thoughts, we also develop the tendency or the proclivity to bring our mind to stillness. And once the mind becomes still or it becomes silent, that is the time when we get into this receptive state or stage of receiving intimations from planes that are beyond the mind. And we also begin becoming closer to truth. Because one of the planes that are beyond the mind is the plane of intuition. And the plane of intuition is definitely closer to truth than the plane of mind. The plane of mind is more rational or logical in structure or in its propensities. Mind also has the tendency of not looking at truth in a wholesome manner. What it does is that it sort of stitches facts from here and there and has the tendency of constructing the truth. It constructs the truth rather than experience the truth or see the truth. And that is why it also is very important that we deconstruct truth and in the process we deconstruct our mind. And how can we deconstruct our mind? We can deconstruct our mind by noticing how our mind has been structured or how our mind has been created. And in order to understand this, we will need to understand all the different philosophies and truths that we hold dear that has actually influenced our mind. All the different good and bad, right and wrong, true and false that we have stored in our mind. So it becomes extremely important for us to basically know our mind. And the more that we are able to know our mind, the more we will be able to transcend our mind, and more we will be able to transcend our mind, more we will be able to get in touch with deeper reality or deeper truth. So what are some vices of the mind that Sri Aurobindo has spoken about? Sri Aurobindo says that mind has the tendency to doubt. It is skeptical. It is good to inquire about spiritual matters, but it is not good to doubt the existence of the spiritual world. Doubt is the enemy of spiritual progress. And this is something, which many different spiritual traditions have spoken about. Inquiring is good, but doubt or doubting is not that good. So one needs to sort of stay away from that. And then he also says that mind has this tendency of becoming arrogant. And that is why you will find that people who are intellectuals, I find this problem quite a bit, in my community, the community of professors. Very arrogant. People who have not transcended or looked into their own respective mind are very arrogant people. And arrogance in the mind or of the mind retards spiritual progress. And then Sri Aurobindo also says that mind has the tendency of investigating supramental or supraphysical aspects of the reality by using the mind or the senses. So what is it that we end up doing? We start using the wrong tools. We don't use the right tools to investigate the nature of reality. The tools have to be right. And in order to investigate the supramental universe, it becomes extremely important to transcend the mind, to go beyond the mind. And as I was saying earlier, stilling the mind or silencing the mind is extremely important. And it can be done in various ways. It can be done through prayers, it can be done through meditation, it can be done by opening oneself to the force of the divine, inviting the force of the divine to descend into one's own being, and taking care of the processes that are retarding the spiritual progress. Sri Aurobindo also says that mind has the tendency of substituting its constructions for knowledge. So all along, when we are intellectual or mental beings, what is it that we are doing? We are constructing knowledge. Or rather, we are constructing something and we are giving it the name of knowledge. It incidentally is not knowledge. It is a mere construction. How does knowledge come about in spiritual matters? It is when dichotomies and dualities have dissolved. When the distinction between subject and object has dissolved. When the subject has become one with the object, that is when knowledge happens. That is the ultimate state. But in the journey, one certainly is assisted by various intuitions that one gets. Intuition is extremely important in our lives. We need it all the time. And if we develop this capacity of stilling the mind and seeking the truth through intuition, invariably we'll find that we are closer to truth. But if we are operating in our mind or through our mind, and if we are busy stitching things together, then the possibility of coming closer to truth becomes remote. At least this is what we get, from the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And personally also, I have found this extremely important. To inquire, to seek, and ask for intimations from the Divine Mother. And as I was mentioning earlier, this gets facilitated by silencing the mind or stilling the mind, stopping the murmurs of the mind. There's another advantage that we have when we stop the murmurs in the mind. We automatically begin to feel joy. We begin to feel ananda. There are a lot of people who get attracted towards substance abuse. Substances have this tendency of stopping the mind and invoking the ananda. But there is a much better way of accessing the same ananda than engaging in the use of substances. And this comes through practice. The feeling of joy or ananda is a natural outcome of stilling the mind. It is a natural corollary. It is bound to happen. But Sri Aurobindo also says that we should not seek it while we are meditating. Why? When you are seeking it, what you are inadvertently doing is that you are making the mind active. Instead of stopping the fluctuations of the mind or stopping the murmurs of the mind, you have given more energy to the mind. When it is seeking in the moment of meditation, its vibrations are not coming to a standstill. And that is why one of the best ways of evolving in this process is not to really seek anything from the divine. The mother would say, the divine is not about barter. One should seek the divine for the sake of the divine, not because what one is going to get out of the process. The divine is not up for barter. The divine is sought because we love the divine, just for the sake of the divine. And then the process becomes absolutely beautiful and joyful when you are not seeking anything from the divine in return, not even the divine. In one of the letters, Sri Aurobindo writes about this. He says that the mind should be free from desire. Any kind of desire. Because the moment you invoke the desire, you invoke your vital. And invariably, your turbid vital which is not pure. And this turbid vital begins to contaminate your mind. What is a good use of mind? It is by aligning it to the process of spiritualization or to the process of psychicization. If the mind is aligned with psychic, and if it is in contact with the psychic, mind develops a greater capacity or propensity of receiving truth. Sometime later, I will come to the process of psychicization. I will hold more talks on the psychic being and how, the psychic can be brought forward. But what I have found in my own experience is by turning more and more devotional, by surrendering oneself more and more to the divine, the psychic begins to come forward. And when the psychic begins to come forward, it not only creates a lot of sweetness within the being, it also keeps the mind aligned to receiving truth or truths. It may not be uninterrupted. It may receive truths in streams, but it certainly gets closer to the divine. There's Another problem that mind has. Mind is very hasty in coming to conclusions. So the mind has to be kept in abeyance. It has to be told, don't come to conclusions so soon. Hold your horses. And then Sri Aurobindo also says that when one is having experiences, when one is having spiritual experiences, then it is much better not to think about those experiences. He says, let the experiences happen. Don't start interpreting the experiences. You can do that later when the experiences have stopped, but not in the moment when the experiences are occurring. Because if you do that, then the experiences will stop. And why will they stop? Your mind will become active. The stillness of the mind will be lost. The murmurs in the mind will increase. The vibrations in the mind will increase. And these vibrations, they will stop the descent of the experience or the force which is occurring within your being. You know, in my presentations, I have always taken, writings of the Mother or Sri Aurobindo in order to elucidate the main topic of conversation. And today also, what I have done is that I have brought, a couple of letters of Sri Aurobindo from the Letters on Yoga, Volume 3. I'm going to read from this letter and, and basically talk about the ideas or the thoughts that come to me. So he says, to reject doubt means control of one's thought. To reject doubts means control of one's thoughts. Very certainly so. But the control of one's thoughts is as necessary as the control of one's vital desires and passions, or the control of the movements of one's body. So here basically he's talking about, the three planes. He's talking about the physical plane, the vital plane, and the mental plane. It is very, it's very easy for most humans to basically control the body. Slightly more difficult is controlling one's vital desires or the movements of the vital. Even more difficult is controlling one's mind, controlling one's thoughts. When we are moving from physical to mental, we are basically going from gross to the subtle. And as the processes become more subtle, more difficult it becomes, to control them. One cannot be a fully developed mental being if one has not a control of the thoughts, is not their observer, judge, master. The mental Purusha, Manomay Purusha, Sakshi, Anumanta, Ishwar. Why is he saying this? When we are controlling our thoughts, when we are observing our thoughts, we are basically activating the witness consciousness, the witness aspect of the divine. We are developing what is known as the Sakshi Bhava. We are observing the movements of one of the modes of Prakriti, quote unquote, the lower aspect of the Divine Mother. And as we are developing this witness consciousness, we are getting closer and closer to the divine. We are enhancing the chances of finding a complete union with the divine where the subject and object completely dissolves or goes away. Interestingly, all this is very logical as well. This world is translogical, but it includes logic also. It does not eschew logic. It does not, remove logic from the scheme of things. It goes beyond logic and then it includes it. So there's an explanation for everything. It is no more proper for the mental being to be the tennis ball of unruly and uncontrollable thoughts than to be a rudderless ship in the storm of desires and passions, or a slave of either the inertia or the impulses of the body. Inertia comes from tamas, which is the main constituent of the physical plane. I know it is more difficult because man, being primarily a creature of mental prakriti, identifies himself with the movements of his mind and cannot at once dissociate himself or stand free from the swirl and eddies of the mind whirlpool. We all know it is very difficult. It does not happen all of a sudden. Control of mind requires practice. And that is why we engage in various spiritual practices. We engage in meditation, we engage in prayers, We find different ways as per our constitution. It is comparatively easy for him to put a control on his body, at least on a certain part of the movements. It is less easy, but still very possible after a struggle, to put a mental control on his vital impulsions and desires. But to sit like the tantric yogi on the river, above the whirlpool of his thoughts, is less facile. Nevertheless, it can be done. all developed mental men, those who get beyond the average, have in one way or the other, or at least at certain times and for certain purposes, to separate the two parts of the mind, the active part, which is a factory of thoughts, and the quiet, masterful part, which is at once a witness and a will, observing them, judging, rejecting, eliminating, accepting, ordering corrections and changes, the master in the house of mind, capable of self-empire, Swarajya. A very long statement, a very long sentence. You see, I find that these spiritual practices, they also help in the development of mind. And mind is important. We have to use it in the world. If we are engaged in world transformation yoga, we'll have to use it. There are a couple of more paragraphs. I'll just go through them and then I'll stop and then I'll open the floor or the screen, for conversations. I feel that I've been talking for a long time, it's time to engage in conversations. The yogi goes still further. I just love his words, I cannot hide my excitement, I cannot hide my devotion, I've stated this earlier. Even his prose is like poetry to me. The yogi goes still further. He is not only a master there, but even while in mind in a way, he gets out of it as it were, and stands above or quite back from where and stands above or quite back from it and free. For him, the image of the factory of thoughts is no longer quite valid. For he sees that thoughts come from outside, from the universal mind or universal nature, sometimes formed and distinct, sometimes unformed, and then they are given shape somewhere in us. And here basically he's talking about his own experience, the first massive spiritual experience that he had. When under the guidance of Lele, he came to a state or a stage where he could see, thoughts entering into his mind. And he developed this capacity, to basically play with thoughts at will. And he speaks about that experience in this letter. The principal business of our mind is either a response or acceptance or a refusal to these thought waves, as also vital waves, subtle physical energy waves, or this giving a personal mental form to thought stuff from the envisioning nature force. It is my great debt to Lele that he showed me this. Sit in meditation, he said, but do not think. Look at your own mind. You will see thoughts coming into it. Before they can enter, throw these away from your mind till your mind is capable of entire silence. I had never heard before of thoughts coming visibly into the mind from outside, but I did not think either of questioning the truth or the possibility. I simply sat down and did it. In a moment, my mind became silent as a windless air on a high mountain summit, and then I saw one thought and then another coming in a concrete way from outside. I flung them before they could enter and take hold of the brain, and in 3 days, I was free. From that moment, in principle, the mental being in me became a free intelligence, a universal mind, not limited to the narrow circle of personal thought as a laborer in a thought factory, but a receiver of knowledge from all the 100 realms of being and free to choose what it willed in this vast sight empire and thought empire. I mention this only to emphasize that the possibilities of the mental being are not limited, and that it can be made free witness and master in its own house. I do not say that everyone can do it in the way I did it and with the same rapidity of the decisive movement, but a progressive freedom and mastery of one's mind is perfectly within the possibilities of anyone who has the faith and will to undertake. The faith and the will to undertake it. Just that trust is required. And I can tell you this for sure, silencing the mind is a beautiful thing. It definitely puts us in with greater possibilities and greater manifestations of truth. So with those words, I will end, and I will open the floor for questions, comments, queries, and so on and so forth. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Yes, Linda. Yeah. This dichotomy between subject and object completely dissolves. Like, for instance, in yoga, when we seek the divine, there comes a time when we and what is being sought, that is the divine, they become one and the same. The distinction does not remain, the separation does not remain. What is the regular epistemology that we follow in contemporary world? The regular epistemology is that we as subjects are pursuing objects of knowledge. And more we work on ourselves, or more we suppress our subjectivity, more objective we will become in our knowledge pursuit. But unfortunately, subject and object are tied together in a dialectical relationship. One does not exist without the other. Just like true does not exist without false, right does not exist without wrong, mountains do not exist without valleys, subject also does not exist without object. For the existence of one, the other is necessary. For the existence of night, day is important. If day disappears, night also will disappear. if true disappears, false also will disappear. If right disappears, wrong will also disappear. So subject, does not exist without object, and vice versa. So we need to understand that for one to exist, the other is important and necessary. So saying that by undermining our subject, we will be able to gain an objective understanding of reality is completely preposterous from the spiritual standpoint. And that is why in all spiritual epistemologies, first the recognition of interdependence of subject and object is emphasized, and eventually the transcendence of subject and object is recommended. So at least what we can do is that we can allow that dichotomy to dissolve in our mental constructions. We can recognize that this dichotomy is just a construction. It has got nothing to do with knowledge. And once we become familiar with this, we basically begin the process of transcendence of dichotomies and dualities, and eventually mind. Does that address your concern, Linda? Thank you. Yes, Michael. Yeah, ego, not the evil. Ego was the helper. Sorry for that misunderstanding. Certainly not. No, I don't play around with those forces. Certainly not, Michael. You're welcome. But yes, what the spiritual progress is certainly facilitated by transcendence of this dichotomy, good and evil. I'm not saying that they don't exist or those forces don't exist. I'm certainly not saying that. But the respective constructions that we have around good and evil, if they dissolve, then our spiritual progress definitely does get facilitated. In the spiritual world, if we come to this understanding that our mind is stupid, or we are completely stupid, in terms of our mental constructions, it's a great achievement in my understanding. It definitely punctures our arrogance, One of these days, I will talk about my own experience, how I dealt with this, because one of the reasons why I also talk about the transcendence of mind so much is because I have engaged in this process quite systematically over a period of time. And I think, my foray into Mother and Sri Aurobindo happened when all my constructions, all my mental constructions about everything completely dissolved, When I had turned into a vegetable, with having no understanding of what this world was all about, I was received in the kingdom of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo.